You get to the door. You can already hear it, glasses clinking, someone's laugh going off like a car alarm, music turned up a little too loud for a normal Tuesday night. And right before you knock, your brain runs an inventory. Do you know anyone in there? No, not one person. Your hand's still on the door and you're already calculating how long is socially acceptable to stay before you can fake a headache. What almost everyone gets wrong the second that door opens is thinking the goal is to look confident, stand up straight, plaster on a smile, walk in like you own the place. Research on first impressions says otherwise. People size you up as friend or threat in under a tenth of a second, long before your posture even registers. Confidence isn't something you perform on the way in. It's something that shows up after you've already started moving. And by the end of this video, you'll know the exact sequence to walk into a room full of strangers and leave feeling like you've known half of them for years. Plus, the one thing almost everyone does in the first 5 minutes that quietly kills the entire night. From the outside, you look fine, relaxed, even. Maybe a little quiet, sure, but plenty of people are quiet, that's just personality, right? You're standing there with a drink, nodding along, glancing at your phone like you've got somewhere else to be. Nobody watching you would guess anything's wrong. Underneath, it's a different story entirely. Underneath, you're doing exit math. You're tracking exactly how many minutes you've been standing near this wall, calculating whether it's been long enough that leaving now would look normal instead of pathetic. You're rehearsing an opening line for the third time and still not saying it, because what if it lands wrong? What if they just stare at you? What if this whole thing confirms the quiet suspicion you've had since middle school, that you're simply not built for rooms like this one? You've felt this. Not the anxious version everyone talks about, the twitchy, sweaty palms kind, the quieter version. The one where you look completely composed on the outside while your inner monologue is basically a hostage negotiation with yourself. Just go say hi. No. What if it's weird? Just do it. What if I have nothing to say after hi? What then? Nobody tells you the part that matters here. That gap, the one between how put together you look and how much you're actually spiraling, isn't a flow. It's just untranslated energy. You've got plenty of social fuel. It's just idling instead of moving. And idling is exactly where most people get stuck for an entire night. So here's what this video is actually going to give you. Not a personality transplant. Not some trick to become the loudest person in the room. Just a sequence, a specific order of small moves that turns that idling energy into actual motion, one step at a time, until you're not the person against the wall anymore. I call it the momentum ladder, not because it's fancy, but because that's literally what it is, a ladder, not a leap. Nobody climbs from I know 0 people here to I'm the life of the party in one move. You go rank by rank, skip a rank and you stall out. Climb them in order and something strange happens. The room stops feeling like a courtroom and starts feeling like a place you're allowed to be in. If you're new here, welcome to Unspoken. This is where we take the stuff nobody explains about how people actually work and break it down so it's usable. Not theory, not vibes. An actual sequence. So let's start where every failed night at a party actually starts not with a bad conversation but with a bad opening move. Let me tell you about the worst hour of my social life. A friend's housewarming, maybe 15 people, and I knew exactly one of them, the friend, and she'd vanished into the kitchen the second we walked in to deal with a candle situation that was apparently urgent. So there I was, alone, in a stranger's living room, holding a plastic cup of something orange like it was a passport. I found the snack table almost immediately, the way water finds the lowest point in a room. There were these little crackers with cheese on them, and I ate exactly one every 90 seconds for what felt like a geological era, just to have something to do with my hands and my face. At one point I picked up my phone, looked at it with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb, and put it back down, because I remembered reading somewhere that pulling your phone out at a party is basically social suicide. So instead I just stood there, cracker in hand. Eyes doing a slow lap of the room like a lighthouse beam, landing on nobody, committing to nothing. At some point I tried to break the seal with a woman near the bookshelf, said something about a book I hadn't actually read, and she gave me the kind of polite half-smile people give a vending machine that's just eaten their dollar. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I retreated back to the crackers like a wounded animal returning to its den, fully convinced the night was a write-off and I should just start planning my exit. Across the room though, there was a guy doing the exact same thing. I was standing near the drinks, looking around, clearly counting down the socially acceptable minutes until he could leave too. And for about 10 minutes, we just orbited each other. Two planets refusing to notice each other's gravity, both silently agreeing that talking first would be too vulnerable a move. Eventually, I cracked. Said something dumb about the drink selection. He laughed. Said something dumber back. 20 minutes later, he introduced me to 3 other people. An hour after that, I'd forgotten I ever felt like furniture. Nothing about that moment required charisma. It required exactly one sentence, said to exactly the easiest person in the room, at exactly the point where doing something, anything beat doing nothing, for 1 more minute. And it turns out there's real research explaining why that one dumb sentence worked so much better than it had any right to. A psychologist named Nicholas Epley at the University of Chicago ran a study with his colleagues Erica Bufby and Gus Cooney, where they had total strangers sit down and talk for a few minutes, then rate how much they liked each other and how well the conversation went. Almost every single person underestimated how much the other person liked them. Not by a little, by a lot. They called it the liking gap, this weird, consistent glitch where you walk away from a conversation convinced it went worse than it did, while the other person is walking away thinking it went great. Which means that guy by the drinks table, the one you're too nervous to talk to because you're sure he'll find you boring, statistically, if you talk to him, he's more likely to walk away liking you than you'll ever believe. Then there's Robert Zajonc, a social psychologist working back in the 60s, who found something that sounds almost embarrassingly simple. The more you're exposed to something, the more you tend to like it. He called it the mere exposure effect, and it wasn't just about people. He ran versions of the experiment with shapes, with nonsense words, with photos of faces people had never seen before. Didn't matter. Repetition alone made people rate things more favorably. Which is exactly why that stranger by the wall who looked slightly intimidating 20 minutes ago starts feeling like a familiar face by the end of the night, purely because your brain has now seen them enough times to stop treating them as a threat. And then there's Robin Dunbar, the anthropologist who spent decades studying how humans actually bond, who found that shared activity and shared laughter do something that pure conversation doesn't. They release the same kind of feel-good chemicals that physical touch does. Which is why helping someone carry chairs or laughing at the same terrible joke bonds two strangers faster than a polite 10-minute conversation about where you both work. Dunbar's older research on primates found something similar happening with grooming animals, who groomed each other regularly, formed tighter alliances than animals who simply spent time near each other. Humans swapped the grooming for laughter and shared tasks, but the underlying mechanism barely changed at all. Stack those 3 findings together and you get the actual engineering behind the momentum ladder. You don't need to feel confident before you talk to someone. The liking gap means they'll probably like you more than you expect anyway. You don't need the perfect opening line. The mere exposure effect means just being near someone repeatedly does half the work. And you don't need deep conversation to bond shared. Low-stakes activity does that faster than talking ever could. In other words, the science says you've been overestimating the risk and underestimating your own effect on people this entire time. Which brings us to why some people at every party never seem to notice any of this, and quietly sabotage themselves before they even get started. There are 5 types of people who walk into a room of strangers and quietly sabotage the whole night before it starts. See if you recognize yourself in one of these. Most people do. First, there's the scanner. The second the scanner walks in, their eyes start doing a slow, deliberate sweep of the room, not looking for just anyone, looking for the right one. The most interesting person, the one who seems worth the risk. Everyone else gets filtered out before a single word is exchanged, treated like background extras in a movie where the scanner is still waiting for the lead to walk on set. The problem is, while the scanner is auditioning the entire room, everyone else has already started talking to each other. By the time the scanner spots someone promising, that person's mid-conversation with 3 other people, and there's no clean way in. The scanner spends the whole night waiting for a perfect opening that never opens, because they were never willing to start with an imperfect one. Then there's the ghost. You know the ghost, you've probably been the ghost. Phone out, thumb scrolling, something that isn't even interesting, just useful as a prop. The ghost thinks the phone is a shield, something that says, "I'm busy, I'm fine, don't worry about me." What it actually says, to everyone glancing over, is, "Do not approach." The ghost isn't protected. The ghost is just invisible. And invisible doesn't feel safer, it just feels lonelier with better lighting. Third is the judge. The judge will absolutely talk to people, but only the right people, the ones who seem like potential real friends, the ones who match some invisible checklist assembled over years of disappointing small talk. Everyone else gets a polite nod and a fast exit. The trouble is, the judge has no way of knowing who's actually worth talking to until after the conversation happens, not before. So, the judge ends up rejecting 9 people on vibes alone and spends the night alone too, guarding a friendship slot that never gets filled because nobody ever got close enough to apply. Fourth, the performer. The performer walks in like they're auditioning for something, cracking jokes a little too fast, laughing a little too loud, working the room like there's a scorecard somewhere. It's exhausting to watch and, frankly, exhausting to be. Every conversation becomes a small show instead of an actual exchange, and people can feel it, that faint pressure of being an audience instead of a participant. The performer collects polite laughs and forgettable interactions, and goes home wondering why none of it stuck, why nobody asked for their number, why a night of constant talking still felt like nobody actually met them. And finally, the statue. Arms crossed not out of hostility, just because it's comfortable or feels safer, nobody quite knows. Feet planted in one spot for the entire night like they've taken root. Face doing that thing where it's not quite a frown, just neutral, but neutral reads as closed off from across a room. The statue isn't unfriendly. The statue's mind might be racing, running through a dozen things they'd love to say. None of it gets read, because bodies talk louder than intentions. And a still, closed-off body says, "Leave me alone," whether or not that's the message being sent. All 5 of these share one thing, and it's the part that actually matters. None of them are personality types. They're not who you are. They're just stalled positions on the momentum ladder, places where the climb stopped before it started. The scanner stalled at rung 1, still hunting for a perfect target. The ghost and the statue stalled even earlier, before movement even began. The judge and the performer both climbed, just in the wrong direction, one filtering people out, one performing instead of connecting. You've probably been at least 2 of these at different parties, maybe even in the same night. That's not a character flaw, that's just what happens when nobody ever hands you the actual sequence. Sit with this for a second though, because it flips everything you just heard. Every single thing that makes you freeze at that party is also underneath it evidence that you're paying attention. Think about it. The scanner isn't shallow. The scanner is reading a room with real precision, noticing energy, status, who seems worth investing time in. That's not nothing. That's a skill, just aimed backwards, used to filter people out instead of picking a place to start. The ghost isn't antisocial. The ghost is so tuned into how they might be perceived that they'd rather disappear than risk landing wrong. That's not weakness, that's social sensitivity turned into a defense mechanism. The judge cares enough about real connection to refuse to fake it. The performer cares enough about being liked to work for it, even if the method backfires. And the statue is often the most quietly perceptive person in the room, just too aware of every possible way a sentence could go badly to risk saying it. None of these are broken settings. They're all just the same: raw material, attentiveness, social sensitivity, a genuine desire to connect pointed in the wrong direction. And that's actually the good news, because raw material can be redirected. You don't need to become a different person to fix this. You need to aim the thing you already have. The confident-seeming people at the party aren't running on some different fuel than you. Most of them just made peace, at some point, with occasionally saying the wrong thing and surviving it. Remember this line, because it's the whole point. The people who struggle most at parties are usually the ones paying the closest attention to them. The room isn't full of confident people and anxious people. It's full of people who noticed everything and decided to act anyway, and people who noticed everything and let that be the reason they didn't. That's genuinely the entire gap, not talent, not charisma, not some genetic social gene other people got and you didn't. Just a decision, made over and over, at the exact moment when doing something small beats doing nothing at all. So if you've spent years assuming you're just not a party person, or bad with strangers, or whatever label you've quietly accepted about yourself, consider the possibility that you were never actually bad at this. You were just standing at the bottom of the ladder, fully capable, waiting for someone to tell you which rank to grab first. That's what comes next. Not a personality change, a sequence. So let's build it. 5 ranks. Climb them in order, and the room does the rest. Rung 1. Pick the easiest possible person, not the most interesting one. Someone standing alone. Someone getting food. Someone doing that same slow scan you used to do. Your only job at this rank is momentum, not chemistry. You're not looking for a soulmate, you're looking for a starting point. Say literally anything, comment on the food, the music, the fact that you both apparently got here at the exact same awkward moment. It doesn't need to be clever, it needs to exist. Rung 2. Learn the name and actually use it. When someone tells you their name, don't let it evaporate the way it usually does. Repeat it once in your head. Say it back within the next sentence. Wait, how do you know people here, Jake? That's it. Almost nobody does this anymore, which means the ones who do become memorable by accident. Names are the cheapest, most underused tool in the entire toolkit. Rung 3. Borrow their trust. After a few minutes, ask who they know at the party and let them introduce you. It's a 2-second question, so who do you actually know here? Can you introduce me to a couple people? But it does something a stranger walking up cold could never do. This single move quietly changes your entire status in the room. You stop being a random stranger and become the person Jake knows, which, to the primitive, tribal part of everyone else's brain, reads as vetted, safe, worth talking to. One good introduction can multiply into 5 conversations you never would have had to start cold. And every one of those 5 people already trusts you a little more than they would a stranger who just walked up out of nowhere. Rank 4. The yes rule. Someone's setting up a game? Yes. People are heading outside? Yes. Somebody needs a hand carrying something? Yes, obviously. These tiny shared moments matter more than they should, because Dunbar's research on bonding wasn't wrong. Doing something alongside someone builds connection faster than talking at them ever will. You're not performing friendliness, you're just present for whatever's already happening, and presence is most of the work. Rank 5, and this one matters more than people think. Protect your own energy. Don't disappear into your phone. Don't plant yourself in one spot for the night. Move a little. Get a drink. Walk the room. Go look at whatever's on the wall for a minute if you need a reset. Anything beats standing motionless with your arms crossed, staring into the middle distance like a security guard who's given up on life. Physically engaged people read as approachable without doing anything else at all, and physically frozen people read as closed off no matter how friendly they feel on the inside, because bodies broadcast louder than intentions ever do. That's the whole ladder. Easiest person first. Names used out loud. Borrowed trust through introductions. Reflexive yeses to shared moments. And a body that stays a little bit in motion the entire night. None of these ranks require charisma. None of them require you to become someone else. They just require you to take the next available step instead of waiting at the bottom for the perfect one to appear. And nobody warns you about this part of ladders. You don't feel the confidence at the bottom. You feel it 2 or 3 ranks up, after you've already started climbing. Which means the advice to just be confident was backwards the entire time. Confidence isn't the ticket in, it's what you build on the way up. Go back to that housewarming for a second. The guy by the drinks table, the one silently counting down his own exit like I was counting down mine. If neither of us had said the dumb thing about the drink selection, that would have just been another forgettable night, filed away as further proof that we weren't the kind of people who did well at parties. Instead, one sentence turned into a friendship that outlasted the actual apartment we met in by years. That's the part that's easy to miss when you're standing at the bottom of the ladder, cup in hand, doing exit math, convinced this one specific room is the problem. It's never really about that one party. It's about every room after this one. The wedding where you don't know a soul, but the bride's cousin ends up being someone you talk to for the rest of the year. The new job, where the first person you sit next to at lunch becomes the reason the whole place feels survivable by week 3. The city you move to alone, where the entire shape of your next 5 years quietly depends on whether you climb the ladder or stand at the bottom of it, waiting for someone else to climb up and get you. And if you ever have kids, or younger siblings, or anyone watching how you move through a room full of strangers, they absorb that. Not from a lecture, from watching whether you freeze or whether you climb. Confidence isn't inherited. It's demonstrated, badly and imperfectly, one awkward first sentence at a time, in front of people who are quietly learning that it's survivable to be the one who speaks first. Then the guy from the bookshelf, the one who gave me the vending machine smile, I ran into him a year later at a completely different event, and we actually talked properly, like two people who'd both quietly grown a little less afraid of being the one who says the first dumb thing. He didn't remember the book comment. I did. It didn't matter either way. So the next time you're standing at a door, hearing the noise on the other side, doing that same inventory, do you know anyone in there? No, not one person. Remember that the room isn't asking you to be confident before you walk in. It's just asking you to take the first rung. Say the dumb thing about the drinks. Learn one name. Say yes to whatever's already happening. The rest of the ladder builds itself. So that's the momentum ladder. Easiest person first, names out loud, borrowed trust, reflexive yeses, and a body that keeps moving. None of it requires you to become louder, funnier, or somehow braver overnight. It just requires the next rung, taken before you feel ready for it, because readiness was never actually going to show up first. Now I want to hear from you. Out of the 5 types we went through: the scanner, the ghost, the judge, the performer, the statue, which one is you at most parties? Be honest. Drop it in the comments, because I guarantee you're not the only one who just recognized themselves a little too clearly. If this helped, a like goes a long way, and subscribing means the next one lands in front of you. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.